The Ural Mountains of Russia, January 1959. A group of 10 young, highly experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute embarked on a journey that was supposed to be a standard Grade 3 trekking expedition, the highest difficulty level in the Soviet Union at the time. Led by the 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, the team consisted of students and graduates who were all physically fit and mentally prepared for the brutal Russian winter. However, at the very beginning of the trek, one member named Yuri Yudin had to turn back due to a sudden flare-up of chronic joint pain. As he said goodbye to his 9 friends, he had no way of knowing that he would be the only one to survive the journey. The remaining 9, 7 men and 2 women, continued deep into the wilderness, heading toward Mount Otorten. In the local Mansi language, the name Otorten chillingly translates to "don't go there," while the slope where they eventually pitched their tent is known as Kholat Syako, or the Mountain of the Dead. They were expected to return and send a telegram by February 12th, but when that deadline passed with no word, a massive search operation involving the military and volunteers was launched to find the missing students. On February 26th, searchers finally stumbled upon the group's campsite on the snowy slopes of Kholat Syako. What they found was a scene of pure, unadulterated nightmare. The group's tent was half collapsed and buried in snow, but upon closer inspection, it was discovered that the canvas had been sliced open from the inside with a knife. This suggested that the hikers were so desperate to escape the tent that they couldn't even pause to open the zipper. They had to cut their way out to flee into the night. Even more haunting was what lay inside the tent. Their warm fur coats, heavy boots, and survival gear were all left behind, untouched. Footprints in the snow revealed that the 9 hikers had run away toward a nearby forest in a state of absolute panic, some wearing only socks and some completely barefoot in temperatures reaching -30 degrees Celsius. Rescuers followed these footprints for about 500 meters until they reached a large cedar tree. Underneath that tree, they found the first 2 bodies, dressed only in their underwear, with their hands raw and bloodied. It appeared they had tried to climb the tree in a frantic effort to escape something on the ground or to see back toward their camp. Between the tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were found, including Igor Dyatlov, lying in positions that suggested they were trying to crawl back to the tent for warmth before the cold finally claimed them. If the first 5 bodies were a tragedy, the discovery of the remaining 4 hikers 2 months later was a full-blown mystery. Found buried under 4 meters of snow in a nearby ravine, these hikers hadn't died of hypothermia alone. They had suffered catastrophic internal injuries. Forensic examinations revealed that one hiker had a major skull fracture, while 2 others had sustained massive chest fractures, so severe that their ribs were completely crushed. Medical experts noted that the force required to cause such damage was equivalent to a high-speed car crash. Yet, in a detail that defies the laws of physics, there was no external bruising or soft tissue damage on their bodies. It was as if their bones had been shattered by an invisible crushing pressure that left the skin intact. Most disturbingly, one of the female hikers, Ludmila Dubinina, was found missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her facial structure. While some suggest scavengers might be responsible, investigators noted that the other bodies nearby were untouched, and the location of her body made scavenger access unlikely. The Soviet authorities, unable to explain the violence of the scene, officially closed the case with a legendary and frustrating conclusion that the hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force. Decades later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most debated mysteries in modern history. Theories range from the scientific to the supernatural. Some researchers argue that secret Soviet military tests involving vacuum bombs or parachute mines might have caused the internal pressure injuries. Others point to a rare weather phenomenon called infrasound, where the wind blowing over the mountain's shape creates low-frequency sound waves that can trigger intense hallucinations, nausea, and a sense of overwhelming dread in humans, explaining why they fled the tent in such a panic. In 2020, a new official investigation by the Russian government concluded that a slab avalanche had buried the hikers while they slept, forcing them to cut their way out. But many experts remain unconvinced. They point out that the slope was too shallow for such an avalanche, and it doesn't explain the missing tongue or why they didn't return for their boots once the danger had passed. To this day, the Dyatlov Pass remains a lonely, snow-swept memorial to 9 lives lost to a night of unexplained terror, a secret the mountain seems determined to keep forever.
Next one.
On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man carrying a black briefcase approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. He identified himself as Dan Cooper and purchased a one-way ticket for Flight 305, a short 30-minute trip to Seattle, Washington. To the gate agents and flight crew, he appeared to be a perfectly ordinary businessman in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit, a white shirt with a black tie, and a mother-of-pearl tie pin. He boarded the Boeing 727, took his seat in the very last row, 18E, and calmly ordered a bourbon and water while waiting for takeoff. Shortly after the plane was in the air, Cooper handed a folded note to a young flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. At first, thinking it was just a lonely passenger's phone number, she dropped the note into her purse without looking at it. But Cooper leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." This chilling moment marked the beginning of the only unsolved skyjacking in commercial aviation history, a case that would baffle the FBI for decades and turn Dan Cooper, later misidentified by the media as D.B. Cooper, into a legendary folk hero. The note demanded $200,000 in negotiable American currency, all in $20 bills, along with 4 parachutes and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft. When Schaffner saw the contents of the briefcase, she was horrified to find a mass of red cylinders and tangled wires that looked exactly like a functional bomb. Cooper was remarkably calm throughout the entire ordeal, never showing signs of anger or panic. He even paid for his drinks and insisted the flight crew be fed during the standoff. Upon landing in Seattle, the authorities met his demands, and in exchange, Cooper released all 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants. However, he kept the pilot, co-pilot, a flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant on board. He gave the pilot very specific instructions. They were to fly toward Mexico City at the lowest possible altitude, roughly 10,000 feet, with the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees, and the cabin unpressurized. Most importantly, he demanded the rear stairs of the Boeing 727 remain open during the flight. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, in the middle of a heavy rainstorm and pitch-black darkness, the crew noticed a sudden change in cabin pressure. D.B. Cooper had lowered the rear stairs, and with $200,000 strapped to his body and a parachute on his back, he leaped into the freezing 200-mile-per-hour winds, vanishing into the storm forever. As soon as the plane landed safely, a massive manhunt was launched. Hundreds of soldiers, FBI agents, and police officers combed the rugged, heavily forested terrain of the Pacific Northwest, focusing on the area where they believed Cooper had landed. Despite weeks of searching through dense brush and freezing temperatures, not a single trace of the man, his parachute, or the money was found. For years, the FBI investigated thousands of leads and scrutinized over 800 suspects, but no one could be definitively linked to the crime. Then, in 1980, nearly 9 years after the jump, a young boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family along the Columbia River. While digging in the sand to build a campfire, he discovered 3 rotting bundles of $20 bills, totaling about $5,800. The serial numbers matched the ransom money given to Cooper. This remains the only physical evidence of the heist ever found outside the aircraft. The discovery led investigators to wonder, did Cooper die during the jump and was his body washed away, or did he intentionally bury some of the money as a decoy? The mystery only deepened because the location of the money was miles away from the predicted drop zone, suggesting the wind or the river current had moved the evidence over time. In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially suspended the D.B. Cooper case, stating that their resources were needed for more urgent matters. They had found Cooper's black tie and tie pin on the plane, which provided some DNA samples, but they never found a match. Theories about Cooper's identity continue to thrive in the world of true crime. Some believe he was a former paratrooper with inside knowledge of the Boeing 727, while others think he was a disgruntled aerospace employee. There are those who believe he perished in the jump, likely succumbing to the freezing cold and the dangerous terrain of the Washington wilderness. Yet without a body, the legend of the man who outsmarted the system and disappeared into the clouds remains alive. D.B. Cooper has become a symbol of the perfect crime, a man who appeared out of nowhere, committed an audacious heist without hurting a single passenger, and then faded into the misty forests of history. To this day, the question remains, who was Dan Cooper, and where did he go with the money? Perhaps the answer is still out there, buried deep in the mud of the Columbia River, or perhaps the man himself lived out his life in quiet luxury, laughing at the world that could never catch him.
Next one.
December 1, 1948, on a peaceful morning at Somerton Beach in Adelaide, South Australia. Two passers-by discovered the body of a well-dressed man slumped against a seawall, his head resting as if he were asleep. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, physically fit, with calves that suggested he might have been a dancer or a professional athlete. He was dressed in a high-quality suit, a white shirt and a tie, unusually formal for a day at the beach. But as police began their investigation, they quickly realized this was no ordinary death. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious cause of death, like a gunshot or a stab wound. And most strangely, every single clothing label had been meticulously cut away from his garments. His pockets contained a half-used pack of chewing gum, a bus ticket, and a train ticket, but absolutely no form of identification, no wallet, no ID card, and no name. It was as if this man had carefully scrubbed his entire identity before coming to this beach to die, leaving the Australian authorities with a riddle that would remain unsolved for over 7 decades. Months into the investigation, a breakthrough occurred during a second, more thorough examination of the man's clothing. Hidden deep inside a secret fob pocket of his trousers, investigators found a small rolled-up piece of paper. It bore the printed words, "Tamam shud." These words, which mean finished or ended in Persian, were torn from the final page of a rare edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a 12th century book of poetry. This discovery led the police to a local man who had found that exact copy of the book in the back seat of his car, which had been parked near Somerton Beach on the night of the man's death. When the police examined the book, they found 2 shocking clues on the back cover. First, there was a local phone number belonging to a nurse named Jessica Thompson, who lived just a short walk from where the body was found. Second, there was a series of handwritten letters that appeared to be a complex, unbreakable code. Despite the efforts of military codebreakers and master cryptographers from around the world, those 5 lines of letters, WHGOABI and others, have never been deciphered. Was it a cipher for a spy ring, or the final cryptic message of a heartbroken man? The investigation then turned to the mysterious nurse, Jessica Thompson. When shown a plaster cast of the dead man's face, she reportedly became visibly distressed, nearly fainting, yet she insisted she had never seen him before. Curiously, she had a son whose physical features, specifically his teeth and ears, matched rare genetic traits found in the Somerton Man, leading many to believe there was a deep personal connection between them that she was desperate to hide. Because the incident happened during the early years of the Cold War, theories quickly shifted towards international espionage. The man's lack of identity, the hidden code, and the proximity to a top-secret rocket testing range led many to believe he was a spy who had been liquidated with an untraceable poison. Toxicology reports at the time suggested digitalis or another powerful toxin might have been used, as his spleen was enlarged and there was internal congestion, but no trace of any known poison was ever found in his system. He was a man without a name, killed by a substance without a trace, carrying a code that no one could read. For 73 years, the Somerton Man lay in a grave marked simply the Unknown Man. However, in 2021, the body was exhumed for DNA testing, and a year later, a researcher named Professor Abbott claimed to have finally identified him. Using advanced hair sample analysis, he identified the man as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. While this identification brought a name to the face, it only opened up more questions. Why would an engineer from Melbourne travel all the way to Adelaide, scrub his labels, and carry a Persian code in his pocket? There is still no record of how he died, or why he was found in such a specific, peaceful position on that beach. The Tamam Shud case remains a haunting masterpiece of mystery. Even if we now have a name, the true story of his final days, his connection to the nurse, and the meaning of his secret code may have died with him on that sand in 1948. Carl Webb, or the Somerton Man, remains a symbol of the secrets we carry and the lengths to which a human being will go to disappear from the world.